Hey, how's it going? It's Sean Bradshaw from cyberfret.com, and in this lesson I'm going to be giving you some tips on how to approach practicing guitar riffs. Sometimes when people first start learning some new guitar riffs, they try to play it all at once. And what I'm going to suggest doing is breaking the riffs down into smaller sections, working on those smaller sections by themselves, practicing the ones that are giving you more difficulty more than the ones that you can already play, and then work on the transitions between those smaller sections and then put the whole thing together. And if you approach practicing the guitar riffs that way, you're going to find that you learn them much more quickly and much better than if you would just play the entire riff all together. Now, kind of as an example that I'm going to use to kind of show you the way that you should approach practicing a guitar riff, I'm going to use a section from an AC/DC song, from Hell's Bells. Now, I was just teaching this song to some private students recently, so it's kind of fresh in my brain, some of the things that I was showing them. And the section that I'm going to be showing you is going to be in the introduction, but kind of after the main riff is played 5 times. What happens is the main riff of the song is played about 5 times, and then it goes almost into a 6th time, but there's a little bit of change. And so with the students that I was working on this with, they had already mastered the first part of the song, that main riff, but we're having a little trouble on the next section where it changed up a little bit. So here, let me just play it for you real quick, and then I'm going to break down how you should approach practicing something like this. Now, the main concept here is not really to teach you this riff, but teach you how to approach practicing a new guitar riff. All right, so now taking a look at approaching practicing this particular riff, if you look at the tablature here, I've kind of got a bunch of little colored brackets underneath it, and they're kind of different ways to kind of break up this riff. And first thing I want you to look at is the 3 blue brackets. And what I've done is I've actually broken this riff into kind of 3 subsections. And these are kind of the subsections that you would want to practice separately. If you look at the orange brackets, those are kind of the transition points between them. And so once you've kind of learned the 3 sections, you want to work on making the transitions between them and putting them all together. And then in the first kind of big section, first blue bracket, I've actually broken that down into 6 different kind of mini parts. And those are just kind of the individual chords that are happening at that particular point. So now let's look at that first section and those different kind of subsections. So what happens is that I have these individual chords. So for every one of those red brackets, the first one being this, I want to think of that as just being a chord where I'm picking out individual notes. And just for a little tip, if you're following along with my picking, is I am picking down on the 5th string and then up on my 3rd and my 4th strings. Down, up, up. And I kind of keep consistent with that in the very beginning of this riff. So I would learn each one of the individual chords. And the next one would be just taking my first finger and barring across the 7th fret. And then I would be barring here across at the 5th fret on my 4th and 3rd strings. And then back up to the 7th fret. And this would all be the same as the main riff that happens in the very beginning. So where I was kind of teaching this to some of my students, they had already had the main riff down, but we were having a little trouble in this particular section. But then the next kind of red bracket is kind of back to the first chord. Whoops. And then, so that whole first section is right, now practicing the second section. And the second section is a lot shorter, and it is just a couple of chords. It's a G5 chord. This is a power chord, and my second finger is on the 6th string at the 3rd fret. My third finger is on the 2nd string at the 3rd fret, and pinky is on the 1st string at the 3rd fret. And I'm actually muting out the 5th string, so that's why you see the X right there. I'm just letting my second finger kind of fall over a little bit and touch it. So one thing to do is, if that was a new chord for you, is kind of practice that chord by itself. Play the chord, lift your fingers off, try to come back down to that chord. All right, so get that particular chord shape underneath your fingers. Then what happens is there's an open 6th string, and you'd play a chord called the D/F sharp, which is like a basic D chord, only you're wrapping your thumb around and playing the 6th string at the 2nd fret. And again, if this was a new chord form for you, play the chord, take your hands off, try to come back to it. So just get used to playing the individual chord shapes. And now put them together, is making the transition between this G5, that plays twice, open 6th string, and D/F sharp. And just play that particular part of the riff over and over again until you're comfortable with those switches. Because otherwise, if you're not comfortable making those switches, then here's where the train wreck's going to happen. You're going to be playing this riff, you may have that first section down, but then you don't have these chords down, and so you kind of slow way down and all right, so you want to work on that part individually. And then the last section, last blue bracket, again a really small part here, is I'm just using my 1st and 4th fingers here, playing here on the 3rd fret of the 5th string and 5th fret of the 4th string. Move my 1st finger down 1 fret, and then play the open 5th string. And that really was the same as the introduction riff. And so really the only new part in this that's different than the intro riff is kind of plugging in this part into the middle. All right, so practice each part individually. The first part. And the second part. And the third part. And now we want to work on making the transitions, the seams of those different parts. And so looking at the first orange bracket here, I'm going to go between the last chord of the first section and the first chord of the next. And it's a big move. I've got to go from here down to this chord. And that's exactly what we're going to practice. So really slow at first. I'm going to play really try to get my fingers into the shape of that chord so I can place all my fingers at once. And so rather than playing the whole riff, I'm going to work now on just the transitions. All right, and I want to do that maybe 20 times right in a row so that when I'm putting the whole riff together, I'm going to be able to make it from this part down to this one. And then the next thing I want to do is work on the transition between the second subsection and the third. And that means going between these two chords, going between the D/F sharp, and this is actually a C power chord here at the 3rd fret on the 5th string. So going between those two chords. And I just want to maybe go back and forth, switch back and forth. Okay? And then maybe I want to play the whole first subsection going to the whole second subsection. And then maybe I want to play the second subsection going to the third subsection. And again, play those different parts many times. So kind of what I'm showing you here is a system that you want to approach practicing. You know, there's really a difference between playing and practicing. And another important thing is practice the different subsections slow. Make sure you're getting all the rhythms. Sometimes it's a bad habit a lot of people have to just kind of attack the song and go up to speed and say, well, I want it to sound like the song. Well, it'll actually never sound like the song if you end up playing wrong rhythms at a fast speed. So work on trying to get the correct rhythms at a slower speed, and then you can increase the speed on the different subsections, and then finally on the whole thing till you can play the whole riff. So if you're going to be learning some new riffs coming up, try to take this approach. Try to figure out where are some good kind of breaking up points. Where can you, kind of chop it up into some subsections and work on those subsections, and then work on the transitions, kind of the last part of each section and the first part of the next sections, in putting them together, and then try to play the whole thing. And you're going to find you're going to be able to learn tunes much quicker. All right, have a good one.